up, Badlands? Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
Good evening. Today is Black Monday, the day the Dow dropped more than 500 points. Today the Dow dropped more than 22%.
Everybody's panic. Everyone's in panic. Everybody was trying to find a bottom.
In 1929. But this crash in 1987 is not just an American experience. Around the world, stock markets fell faster than a skydiver without a parachute.
What we have to confront is a deep, systemic, and structural restructuring of our world. And this will take some time. And the world will look differently after we have gone through this transition process.
For centuries, they've been stuffing their stomachs with human flesh, and they've been stuffing their pockets with money. But they must realize that this bowl of vampires is about to end. But the common people of these countries in their heart, they can feel what's happening. They can see our struggle for our independence, for our true sovereignty. And they see this connection with their aspirations to be truly independent, which is exacerbated by the fact that in the Western elites there is a strong desire to freeze the current unfair state of things in international affairs.
Well, let me tell you something, brother. When they took a shot at my hero, and they tried to kill the next President of the United States, enough was enough. And I said, let Trumpomania run wild, brother. Let Trumpomania rule again. Let Trumpomania make America great again.
People who don't believe are walking dead. They are asleep, and this is the awakening.
All right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Book of Trump. I don't know why our background is not there, but let's throw it up. There it is. I'm your host, Gordon McCormick, Ghost of Base Patrick Henry. Tonight, we are going to be doing Chapter 13, The Lion of Damascus is the title, and that would be referring to Bashar al-Assad. So last week, we did Righteous Russia with Burning Bright, where we went into the origin story of Vladimir Putin and kind of laid the foundation for what Putin was going to be doing. Well, for everything that we're understanding about Putin now, ending right around 2010. I mean, we kind of went up until about 2010, got a little bit into the first Trump administration, but that's really what I think the rest of the show is going to be about moving forward. So tonight we're going to do the same thing with Assad. We're going to talk about Assad. He was a pretty important figure in the modern Middle East. Certainly has had close relations with Russia. Was overthrown. His government was overthrown in early December, you will recall. And I don't think personally that we've heard the last from about Assad, but that remains to be seen. Before we go any further, though, let's hit a few sponsors. The first of which being Gart Plymouth. So, Badlands Media is headed to Plymouth, Massachusetts with the 8th stop on the Great American Restoration Tour, May 1st through 4th. Don't miss out on the conversations and shenanigans. Get your virtual tickets today. With virtual tickets, ensure you are part of the action wherever you may be. You'll gain access to an exclusive Gart chat to interact with other in-person and virtual attendees. Get behind-the-scenes photos and videos. Get to ask the panel questions so you can be part of the live discussion. And while many of our show hosts are at the conference, you may notice some changes to our regularly scheduled programming. Get your fix of Badlands Media by purchasing your virtual ticket today. And if you can't watch live, don't fret. Replays of the entire event will be available to all ticket holders. Visit badlandsmedia.tv/events for details on both in-person and virtual tickets. All right. And actually, let's go ahead. Whoops, took myself off. Hit the wrong button. Let's go ahead and also do another one. Looks like Matt may have been in here cleaning up some videos. Just stand by for processing. All right, Golka. The last 4 years have put so much stress on American family finances. Help end the stress now and celebrate the golden age with President Trump by diversifying with gold and silver. Remember President Trump's first term? Gold increased by 55%. Don't wait. Diversify your hard-earned assets and buy your gold from Goldco now with no purchase minimums. Goldco has been established as a top-rated precious metals company and a leader in the gold industry, providing white glove treatment for over 10 years. Their buyback guarantee assures you that if your situation changes, they will repurchase your metals at the best price, providing you with peace of mind. You may even qualify for up to 10% back in bonus silver. Visit badlandsgold.com to claim your free information and instantsilver.com/badlands to see how much free silver you can get. Find out the relationship between gold, silver, Trump, and you with the free report focused on Trump and your financial future. That's badlandsgold.com and instantsilver.com/badlands to take control of your financial destiny. And thank you to Golka. Okay, yeah, actually, before we do that, I wanted to, since this is the Book of Trump, I thought it made sense to open up this. Let me open up this image real quick and so open that, and then we will share screen because what was it? Chapter 5, I think. Yeah, chapter 5, if I'm not mistaken, was the episode we did on Kanye West. And I noticed this morning that Kanye put out a post pretty early, actually. It looks like it's 4:48 a.m. And this is what it says. It says, "Okay, I've come to the realization that I'm not a Nazi, and hopefully you guys have come to the realization that I can and will say whatever the F I feel like whenever the F I feel like it." Okay. Thanks, Kanye. But yeah, I think to me that's pretty much him saying what I was speculating as well, that he's kind of been running an op, that the whole like Nazi thing he was doing was really more of a shock jock kind of PR campaign. And you'll remember that Trump said in his book, The Art of the Deal, that there's no such thing as bad publicity. As long as the media is talking about you, or the public's talking about you, then you are relevant and matter. And, you know, I do think it's interesting that assuming that screenshot, I think I pulled that screenshot off of a website or something, but because Kanye goes back and deletes all his posts after he posts them. So assuming that was posted 4:48 a.m. Eastern time, I believe that would have been before the story about the Pope being dying was posted. Not that I think those two things are related in terms of like coordination or narrative deployment or anything, but I think it's interesting that Kanye chose the morning after Easter to reveal that that whole thing was an op, and he's not really a Nazi. And I don't know. There's a whole thing about rebirth and a metaphor in there that I think is interesting. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see Kanye reemerge, maybe not immediately, but in the near future, return to his Jesus is King 2019 era, for lack of a better word. We'll see, though. We will see. So how's the chat doing? Looks like we got a pretty good crowd. Everyone, please hit the thumbs up. Good to see everyone. You say what's up to the chat. All right, so let's get into it. And I wanted to start tonight with a post from General Flynn, actually. Let me pull this up. Okay, so this is from General Flynn. He posted this December 10th, 2024, which would have been, I believe, 2 days. Would have been what? I think if memory serves, I think Assad was left Latakia, which means he left Syria on a Russian helicopter and flew to Moscow on December 7th. And let me just pull up my calendar and check, because it definitely happened on a Saturday. I just want to fact check myself. Yep. December 7th was a Saturday. So this was posted by General Flynn at 9:35 a.m. on the following Tuesday. And he is quote posting another account, and he says, a must-read, exceptional analysis and reporting, really well done. So what? Be careful what you ask for. And then he says, quote, want to know Syria's future? Look at Idlib, the province under quote-unquote rebels' control. Idlib is a city in Syria. And I think what he's referring to is he's referring to the fact that the people who overthrew Assad was ISIS and Al-Qaeda, of course, created by the State Department, U.S.-backed, Israel-backed, radical jihadi terrorists, all the people that, the Republicans and the neocons and everybody have claimed for a long time to hate, and now all of a sudden they're cheering because they're overthrowing Assad. And I think tonight, as we go through Assad's origin story, maybe it will become clear why the Uniparty, both the Democrats and the Republicans, who can never agree on anything, agree on the fact that they both hate Assad. I think that's going to become very clear. Not unlike, by the way, the fact that they both hate Vladimir Putin. I think those are directly related. They also both hate Donald Trump. I think all three of those shared hatreds are related. So let's just run through this real quick. It's a long thread, but I do think it's worthwhile given the context of the show. And so the first post just shows some pictures. This is him and his wife. You see these are Christians marching in Syria with a picture of Assad, a portrait of Assad. Here is a pro-Assad rally. I assume that's, given the mountains right there, I believe that's Damascus. And then it says in the second post, what happened since 2011 was not a civil war. It was a proxy war waged by over 100,000 jihadis flown into Syria from all over the world. And then there's this fantastic map this person's created. And let's just make this a little easier to look at. And we will copy this thing into our trusty mind map. Let's take a look at it. We can zoom in on it. And you can see that the red arrow has a black arrow inside of it. And it says, since October 2014, ICSR report. And the red denotes the total fighters. The black denotes additional fighters. and then it just starts to give you numbers of where all these fighters are coming from. So the initial fighters, so the red means the fighters that showed up on day one, and then the black are fighters who came later. And so you can see the ones that are purely red arrows, that's where the initial fighters came from. 1,500 fighters from Morocco, 250 from Algeria, 3,000 from Tunisia, 600 from Libya, 360 from Egypt, over 2,000 from Jordan, over 2,500 from Saudi Arabia, 110 from Yemen, and then, dozens and dozens from the other Gulf states, 100 from Sudan, 70 from Somalia. And then the reinforcements all start to come from Europe, and then also Asia. It looks like you get a bunch from Asia. But I think these reinforcements are coming from the online PSYOP campaigns that we've heard about in the media, where like online they target vulnerable people, young people typically. They groom them, they convince them that there's something out there worth fighting for. Give them purpose in their life. All you have to do is leave your home, come to Syria, and join ISIS, and you too can matter, and your life can have meaning. And that's basically what the PSYOP that was run. So let's flip back to the thread. The next post, weapons also flowed from all over the world, and they were sneaked into Syria, mostly across the Syria-Turkey border. Now, this is getting into the Syrian civil war, which we're actually going to go up until the Syrian civil war tonight. So we're going to end at the Syrian civil war, and we're going to have the Syrian civil war kind of be its own episode, because I think that'll be when the Righteous Russia and Assad episodes kind of merge into their own. And I might bring Matt on to help do that one. But we'll see. But anyway, so this is an arms pipeline to Syrian rebels. You can see where these weapons are flowing in from. So a lot of these weapons, airwifts are proportional to the number of flights. And so these are flights being flown into full of weapons. A lot of them are coming from Qatar. I mean, the thickest arrow you see here is coming from Qatar. You also have a pretty thick arrow coming from Croatia, coming from Saudi Arabia. What they're not showing here is they're not showing Libya. But Libya became one of the big sources of armor for and weapons for ISIS. And you'll notice they're all being flown into Ankara, into Turkey, and then they were walked across the border into Syria and given to these rebels. And that's how this opposition against Assad formed. The next post, the collusion to topple Assad involved many countries. U.S. and Israel supplied weapons, money, and propaganda. Saudi Arabia and Qatar provided money. Al Jazeera did the propaganda. Turkey and Jordan played key roles in logistics. UK provided propaganda and established the white helmets. France recruited traitors. And I assume what they mean by that is that France probably had a very large contingent of France has a very large presence in Syria because it was a French colony. We're going to get into that in a minute. Syria started as a French colony 110 years ago, 106 years ago at the end of World War I. And so it would make sense that France would be the one that would go in there and recruit and cultivate traitors among the Syrian people. They probably also had defectors who had gone to France and lived in France, who they probably sent back to help with the recruitment. And then you can see this Venn diagram that they make. The red is moderate rebels, the Free Syrian Army. The green is Al Qaeda. The blue is ISIS, and they all blend together, and they form. And as they overlap, that represents other proxy groups that call themselves different names, but they all basically serve the same master, as you can understand. And that master is the coalition of countries that you see on screen. And we're going to get into the motives that led to these countries doing this. Well, maybe this guy's going to do it for us. The two main reasons: the U.S. and Israel want total hegemony in the region. The U.S. has had plans to break up many countries in the region, plus the Greater Israel Project. Qatar wanted the gas pipeline through Syria to Turkey to Europe, but Assad wanted an Iranian pipeline. Both of those are true. And so here are some of the maps that have circulated of what maybe the Middle East should look like. And this is, the balkanization of the Middle East. And, whether or not these maps make sense, some of this stuff actually might make sense. It might make sense to create some of these countries, but I think the way in which they were going to be done was through violence, a lot of violence. And the violence would create destabilization, but destabilization would create opportunity to subjugate the people, because when there's that much violence and destabilization, people can't organize to form a prosperous society. It makes them very easy to subdue. Kurdistan, for example, the purple one right here, that is a pretty legitimate boundary line showing where the ethnic Kurds live, and they were intentionally carved up after World War I when the modern lines in the Middle East were drawn. They intentionally separated the Kurds so that they could in the future be used as proxies in the different countries to destabilize the governments. That was done by design. So, maybe creating a Kurdistan makes sense, but that's something that should be done through conversation and through diplomacy, and not necessarily through the way the State Department and their partners would like it done. Saudi Arabia, you can see, gets carved up into multiple countries, one of them being the Islamic Sacred State. Part of it given to Yemen, part of it given to Jordan, part of it given to this Arab Shia state, which would be Iraq. Iraq would be split into two countries: Sunni Iraq, Shia Iraq. Iran gets carved up, a lot of it given to Afghanistan. This other country, Baluchistan, that's another ethnicity that's down there. Kurdistan, Azerbaijan. So that's just, it's an interesting map, but it's not something that should be forced on to people. It's something that should happen through diplomacy. So this is another pretty famous map. The two pipelines that wanted to be built, one of them originated from Qatar. Qatar has been a longtime partner of the U.S. military, the CIA, MI6. We've covered that pretty extensively on other shows. And then the other pipeline would be out of Iran, and that was backed by Russia. And so you can see how the one from Iran was supposed to run up, cross over Iraq into Syria, and terminate on the Syrian coast. And then the one from Qatar was supposed to run across Saudi Arabia, cross Jordan, go through Syria into Turkey, and then feed Europe. One of them, I guess, would have been an LNG. This red one would have been an LNG pipeline, meaning liquid natural gas. They had converted to LNG, put it in tankers, ship it to Europe. That's a more expensive process, but it doesn't require as much startup cost because you don't have to build a massive pipeline through Europe. You don't have to deal with the logistics of going through Europe, which would have been very difficult for Russia and Iran to negotiate. So they're better off just taking it to Syria, converting it into LNG, putting it on ships, then taking it to the ports in Europe and selling it that way. And then, of course, the Greater Israel Project, which I've covered pretty extensively on other shows. All right, the next post, in 2010, the NY Times travel section listed 31 places to visit in the world. This is where it gets interesting, providing some context into Assad. Damascus, the capital of Syria, was ranked number 7. So the New York Times, which has been a mouthpiece, an anti-Assad mouthpiece for a while, because remember, the New York Times is also anti-Putin. So they're anti-Putin, they're anti-Assad. And remember, Obama was anti-Assad too. So don't get trapped in the uniparty, controlled opposition dynamic. Well, I thought the Republicans were the ones who hated Assad. No, both parties hated Assad, and that's what makes him relatively unique among world leaders. And then it says why? Because Syria was peaceful and prosperous. In 2010, Vogue magazine had a nice article on Asma Assad, the first lady of Syria, is Assad's wife. A Rose in the Desert described all of her great works in education, theater, charity, hospitals. Asma Assad was born and raised in the UK, where she met her husband, who was an ophthalmologist. It's an eye doctor. And yeah, that's a difficult word to say. He was an eye surgeon. And we'll get to that part in the story. The West once loved Assad. He was called the Lion of Damascus. There's where the title of tonight's episode comes from. France gave him the highest award, the Legion of Honor. Queen Elizabeth invited Assad and his wife to visit the castle. Nancy Pelosi flew to Syria to meet with him. European and Arab leaders met with him all the time. He even went. Even the Pope went to Syria to meet with him. So yeah. And then it says Syria under Assad was secular and moderate. Sunnis, Shias, Christians, Alawites, which is what Assad is, Kurds, Armenians, etc., got along with each other. No Al Qaeda, no Sharia law, no Muslim Brotherhood. Syrians loved Assad. He could walk around and drive around Damascus and Syria without a huge security force. In fact, the Arab world loved him. In a 2009 Zogby poll, an American firm, Assad was the most popular leader in the region, in the Middle East. And so here are pictures of him. I mean, look at this. He's just walking through a crowd. I mean, obviously, he probably has some security guys around him. But could you imagine any leader in the world walking through a crowd like this? How dangerous that would be if there was someone in that crowd who wanted to stab him? And this is in the Middle East. Here he is just driving his own car, just driving around. Very, very dangerous for somebody, for a world leader to do, unless the people genuinely support him. And then it says right here, this is Foreign Policy Magazine, I believe. Bashar al-Assad was the highest rated Arab leader in the question, which two world leaders outside your own country do you admire most? He scored an 18%, whatever that means. Assad is also a good father and husband. This is a big one for me. For me personally, I look at this when I'm evaluating just public figures in general, especially people who are highly ambitious, because ambition a lot of times will negate this characteristic. It says Assad is also a good father and a husband. He raised smart, down-to-earth, and compassionate children. And here are just pictures of him and his family. It's easy to take pictures with your kids. I mean, Washington, D.C. politicians do it all the time. But it's another thing for your kids to grow up and actually be good people. I mean, we've seen the children of D.C. politicians and what they do when they grow up. And a lot of them are weirdos. What's his name? Tim Kaine's son got arrested in the 2020 riots up in Minnesota or Wisconsin, wherever it was. Here's Asma Assad, the ideal first lady. Reminds you a lot of Melania. She has a lot like Melania vibes, kind of. But for reasons discussed earlier, U.S. and its evil friends decided to do a regime change. Remember, this thread is endorsed by General Flynn. He said, read this thread. This is very well researched. So I'm going to read it as it's written. But for reasons discussed earlier, U.S. and its evil friends decided to do a regime change in Syria. The quote-unquote moderate rebels were neither moderate nor rebels. They are low IQ extremists and head-chopping terrorists aligned with Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Al-Qaeda equals Al-Nusra equals HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. And HTS is the regime that has taken control since December and now runs Syria. The U.S.-funded rebels are murderous thugs who ruthlessly execute men and women. They would kill Shias and Christians just because of the religion. They have destroyed numerous Shia shrines and mosques and Christian churches. And that's something that's really important to remember, is that the groups who suffered the most under ISIS were Muslims. It was Muslim shrines and Muslim Muslim relics and Muslim mosques that was destroyed. Those were destroyed at the highest rates because, according to the Wahhabis, these Muslims are heretics. These Muslims are bad Muslims. And so they are the most egregious traitors of them all because they have misrepresented the religion in the eyes of the Wahhabis, of the extremists. It says Syrian rebels are actually jihadists from all over the world, including Uyghurs from China. These fanatics have terrorist camps for their own children who are brainwashed to become even suicide bombers. This is not a popular uprising against President Assad. While U.S. NATO-funded terrorists targeted Christians, it was Assad who protected Christianity in all of its forms. When the rebels destroyed historic Christian monasteries, Assad visited and rebuilt them. All the church leaders in Syria have repeatedly spoken in favor of Assad, but the U.S. media deliberately ignore them. And this is very true. Lots and lots of pictures of all over the place of Assad meeting with Christian leaders in Syria. And this goes back to that parade we saw earlier, a Christian parade where they're celebrating Assad, probably because he rebuilt their church. It says U.S. actively planned regime change as early as 2004. Remember that date, 2004. In 2005, CNN's Christiane Amanpour interviewed President Assad when she brazenly told him that the U.S. is funding Syrian opposition and trying to oust him in a coup. Let's listen to this. It's 1 minute long.
Mr. President, you know the rhetoric of regime change is headed towards you from the United States. They are actively looking for a new Syrian leader. They're granting visas and visits to Syrian opposition politicians. They're talking about isolating you diplomatically and perhaps a coup d'etat or your regime crumbling. What are you thinking about that?
I feel very confident for one reason, because I was made in Syria. I wasn't made in the United States, so I'm not worried. This is Syrian decision should be made by the Syrian people, nobody else in this world. So we don't discuss it in Syria.
What would happen, do you think, if there was an alternative to you? Who is the alternative to you?
Could be any Syrian, any national Syrian, and we have a lot. I'm not the only person who is eligible to be president. We have a lot of Syrians, so we don't have any problem about that. But no Syrian would be allowed to be president if he's made anywhere outside our borders. This is a Syrian principle.
All right. And what he's referring to there is that it's pretty common in parts around the world, especially the Middle East, for these guys who get, like Matt Ehret and I talk about this all the time, these leaders who get installed through regime change. And the regime change is done through like populist uprisings where like NGOs go in there and fund a bunch of psyops and PR stunts, and the CNNs of the world come in and give positive PR to these men of the people kind of figures. And it turns out these guys are actually born in France and Britain and educated in Europe and have deep ties to those governments. And that's what he means by that, is that they're not made in the places where they claim to hail from. It's like their parents left when they were children or something like that. Under George W. Bush, the U.S. secretly recruited and funded opposition leaders in Syria, but Assad kept winning elections. Sounds familiar. It sounds like Putin. Later, U.S. State Department gave millions of dollars to establish a TV station, Barada TV, to broadcast anti-Assad propaganda within Syria. And this is where it gets a little sticky, because it's like, if you're Assad and the U.S. is doing this, that this TV station is funded by the CIA, is funded by the State Department. It says right here, Barada TV says the State Department has secretly financed Syrian political opposition groups and related projects, including a satellite TV channel that beams anti-government programming into the country, according to previously undisclosed diplomatic cables. The London-based satellite channel Barada TV began broadcasting in April 2009, but has ramped up operations to cover the mass protests in Syria as part of a long-standing campaign to overthrow the country's autocratic leader, Bashar al-Assad. It says Barada TV is closely affiliated with the Movement for Justice and Development, a London-based network of Syrian exiles. Classified U.S. diplomatic cables show that the State Department has funneled as much as $6 million to the group since 2006. So it's like, if you're Assad and that this TV station is funded by, the CIA, it's run by a group of exiles who are based in London, are you going to let that thing keep operating, or are you going to go shut it down? I mean, a lot of people, the smart move is probably to go shut it down, especially if you understand how sophisticated the psyops are that the CIA run and how effective they are. And the fact that they're lying to the people in order to destroy you and enslave your people effectively. So when they say an autocratic leader has shut down a TV station, well, a lot of times the TV station is run by the CIA, and that's just a known fact. And it says right here, this is from 2006, Syria and Bush's crosshairs. The Bush administration has been quietly nurturing individuals and parties opposed to the Syrian government in an effort to undermine the regime of President Bashar Assad. Parts of the scheme are outlined in a classified 2-page document that says that the U.S. already is supporting regular meetings of internal and diaspora Syrian activists in Europe. The document bluntly expresses the hope that these meetings will facilitate a more coherent strategy and plan of actions for all anti-Assad activities. The document says that Syria's legislative actions scheduled for March 2007 provide a potentially galvanizing issue for critics of the Assad regime. To capitalize on that opportunity, the document proposes a secret election monitoring scheme in which internet accessible materials will be available for printing and dissemination by activists inside the country and neighboring countries. The proposal also calls for serendipitously giving money to at least one Syrian politician who, according to the document, intends to run in the election. The effort would also include voter education campaigns and public opinion polling, with the first poll tentatively scheduled in early 2007. Does this sound familiar, guys? Because this is exactly what your State Department did to us, the American people, in 2020 and again in 2024. Should we, the American government, be going to other countries and giving their politicians money and educating their voters on who the best person is to vote for and monitoring their elections and running their elections for them? No, I don't think we should. That's actually something that really evil, tyrannical scumbags do. And that's what our government does. So we are the tyrannical scumbags, America. And it's really, really disgusting. And we have to round up every single person involved in this kind of stuff, and they should be forced to face justice, whether it's in this country or the country in which they impose themselves on. Maybe we should send them to Syria and let Assad deal with them. I think I'm fully in favor of that. 2011 saw the biggest regime change operations ever conducted by the U.S. It was called the Arab Spring. I'm not going to get into the Arab Spring stuff, so I'm going to kind of scroll past that because we're going to do the Arab Spring in a separate episode. I want to see. I thought that he had done. Okay, this is actually, I think this one's worth doing because we're trying to provide some context on Assad. This is about the chemical weapons. This is a short thread. Even though we're getting kind of ahead of ourselves, I want to go back to the origin story of Assad. I'm just trying to open people's minds into what Assad actually is, because all you've been told, no matter who you get your news from, is that Assad is evil and that Assad is a bad guy. That's all you've been told. So I think we need to have a little more context here. It says, when it comes to the use of chemical weapons, the mainstream narrative has amnesia. The quote-unquote rebels, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, HTS, Al-Nusra, FSA, which is Free Syrian Army, have produced and used sarin, chlorine, and mustard gas in Iraq and Syria for a long time. And then here's some screenshots of various articles where it says ISIS used chemical arms at least 52 times in Syria and Iraq. Report says Ewens Delpat says evidence Syria rebels use sarin, chemical weapons used by rebels in Syria. Islamic State militants allegedly used chlorine gas against Iraqi security forces. And what's his name? The guy who did the pipeline story, somebody in the chat will remember it. He did a great article in 2016 where he exposed Obama. Obama was the one who most likely gave the chemical weapons, the sarin gas, to ISIS, and then ISIS deployed it in Aleppo, and then the media blamed it on Assad and said that Assad was the one who did it. Here it is. Many chemical attacks were staged or faked by the jihadists in Syria, like this one in Khan Shaykhun in 2017 was staged to force Trump to respond. A little pothole on a remote road was supposed to be a chemical weapon attack, and a guy wearing sandals and an exposed body gathering evidence. The total psyop here. In Douma, Syria, there was another claim of Assad using chemical weapons in 2018 when the reporters from OAN, an American alternative news channel, went to the town. People told the reporter the chemical attack was a hoax. Never happened. Imagine that. Here's a 1-minute clip. Let's listen to it.
So the residents told me that the terrorists staged this attack to get the Western powers to attack the Syrian army and get them off their backs so that they could escape. And that story was told to us by numerous people. So I asked them also what they thought about President Bashar al-Assad, because that's also a big question for a lot of people. I mean, you hear people like Boris Johnson and other leaders saying that President Bashar is terrorizing his people and that he's being very brutal to them. And again, this is just repeating facts that are out there in the media right now. And so when I talked to the people who lived in these towns, they specifically said that they loved Bashar al-Assad. They thought that he was great, and they said that. So the residents.
Okay, so it wasn't a faked attack. I'm sorry, I misspoke. It was a hoax, meaning that the rebels launched the chemical attack against the civilians as they were retreating, and so then the American forces were forced to stop pursuing them and help the people. But of course, the American news media didn't tell you that. And the reason they didn't tell you that is because they weren't required to, because of Obama revoking the Smith-Mundt Act in 2012. They're allowed to lie to you. They're allowed to engage in propaganda. Totally legal. Absolute scumbags. Here's a brave CNN reporter smelling clothes to figure out what deadly chemical weapon was used by evil Assad to kill his own people. I mean, wow, that's ridiculous. Watch how U.S.-funded terrorists in Syria teach children how to fake a chemical attack, Al-Qaeda and its mastery of propaganda and fake news. So like they're literally just faking an attack, and this clown is running around. Wow. And then literally the art and theater of faking chemical attacks, how to engage in atrocity propaganda to frame your geopolitical opponent. Here's a guy applying like movie makeup, like Hollywood makeup to a little girl to make it look like her face has been split open, but it's literally just makeup. Syrian rebels with chemical weapons that could be fired in something like cannons. So they're the rebels with the cannons. And it fits too well for truth seekers. So yeah, Seymour Hersh, that was his name. Yep, Seymour Hersh was 2013. And yeah, it was the sarin gas at Ghouta. That's what it was in the Syrian civil war. And Seymour Hersh wrote an article where he exposed it, and as I recall, his article demonstrated that the type of chemical that was reported to be used in that attack was only made in CIA labs. So like it wasn't even possible to create the chemical because the chemical had to come from the CIA. Because they were the only ones who were capable of making that specific chemical, as I recall. Yeah, so I think that wraps it up. I don't want to get into the Arab Spring. I don't want to go too deep into that because that's a different episode, like I said. But let's go back to Assad and his origin story. And so before we get into Assad, let's just do a really, really quick, brief breaking history kind of dive into Syria and how Syria came into existence as we understand it. And so John Harold and I did a kind of a lengthy, like 1 hour and a half, 2 hour explanation of what I'm about to explain in a few minutes. So if you want to listen to that, I will go find the link and I'll put it in the comments. Just come back and check that out later. But the TLDR is that in World War I, you had the Ottoman Empire, which is shown right here in the red and orange. And the Ottoman Empire was on the side of Germany, meaning that they were against us. They were against America and Britain. And so what Britain did is they went into parts of the Ottoman Empire where they were already present, which was Egypt and the Red Sea. Egypt technically became part of the British Empire in 1876 when Evelyn Baron of the Baron Bank was appointed the Comptroller General of Egypt. And the reason that happened is because Egypt defaulted on its payments for the Suez Canal. Loans were taken out from London-based banks to dig out the Suez Canal. It was a French, British, and Egyptian joint venture. After the Civil War, Southern cotton from America flooded the world markets because they were embargoed during the Civil War. That drove the price of cotton down. The price of cotton collapsed. That's Egypt's chief export. You've heard of the Giza cotton from Mike Lindell in My Pillow, and because of that situation, it caused the Egyptian economy to tank, and Egypt could not make its payments on the loans. And so because of that, the British partners, these are like oligarchs, bought out Egypt's shares and basically said, all right, well, we're going to basically take control of your government because your government's insolvent now, and we have to make sure that the Suez Canal continues to operate as it's supposed to. So this guy, Evelyn Barron, who I think I have his, if I'm not mistaken, I think I have his picture down here. Well, it's somewhere over here. That's all right. But yeah, Evelyn Barron, Bad News Bears. And so, thought I had it right there. Anyway, so Egypt becomes part of the British Empire, and then World War I breaks out. Britain is, even in the years leading up to World War I, they are going into Mecca. Those who've seen Lawrence of Arabia, let me see if I can pull that up. Those who've seen the movie Lawrence of Arabia, I know Bay Theater Dave and others in the chat are fans of the movie. And let's see. Oh, actually, no, I have that on this one. I'm getting all my maps mixed up now. Right here. So those who've seen that movie know that this guy right here is Prince Faisal. He's the one he's the one played by Alec. Someone in the chat will have to remind me of his name, but the guy who plays Obi-Wan Kenobi plays this guy in the movie. And it's actually, I think, worth watching. Let's see if I can pull that up. Yeah, so the British Army is meeting with these guys early on. They're meeting with the Hashemites, and the Hashemites are the direct descendants of the Prophet Muhammad. They, for 700 years, ruled Mecca and that kingdom along the coast of the Red Sea. And the British are promising them, if you help us fight the Ottomans, we will give you your country. We'll give you your sovereignty. We'll give you everything you've always wanted. Here we go.
Recite then as much of the Koran as may be easy to you. God knoweth that there be some among you sick, while others travel through the earth in quest for the bounties of God.
Okay, so this scene is Lawrence, the guy in the blonde hair, is just like a lower level soldier, and he's with Allenby, who's the commander in charge. Allenby, of course, is not getting along with the Arabs. The Arabs don't respect him. He doesn't respect the Arabs, but you'll see that they actually come to respect the way that Lawrence sees the world. And this movie is based on the autobiography of Lawrence and the way that he told the story. All these people in this scene and in this movie are real people, except for the guy standing up. He's not a real character. He's an amalgamation of multiple characters.
And now sailing the brightness, by the noonday brightness, by the night when it darkeneth, thy Lord hath not forsaken thee.
Bounteous to thee. And in the end shall your Lord be.
Surely the future shall be better for thee than the past.
And in the end shall your Lord be bounteous to thee, and thou be satisfied.
So, yes, Colonel.
I want a decision, sir.
You want me to fall back on yellow?
Well, you're not doing much good here, sir. I'm sorry to rub it in, sir, but we can't supply you here.
You could supply us through Aqaba.
Aqaba? Well, if you can get hold of Aqaba, sir, of course we can supply you. But you can't.
You could.
You mean the Navy? The Turks have 12-inch guns at Aqaba, sir. Can you imagine what that means?
Yes, I can imagine.
Put that out of your mind, sir. The Navy's got other things to do.
Oh, yes, protecting the Suez Canal.
The one essential sector of this front is and must be the canal. You can see that, sir, surely.
I see that the canal is an essential British interest. It is of little consequence to us.
I must ask you not to speak like that, sir. British and Arab interests are one and the same.
Possible.
Ha! Ha! Upon my word, sir, you're ungrateful. Fall back on Yambo and we will give you equipment, give you arms, advice, training, everything.
Guns?
A modern rifle for every man.
No, guns. Artillery. Guns like the Turkish guns at Medina.
Yes, give us guns and keep the training.
Your men need training far more than guns, sir.
The English will teach the Bedou to fight?
We will teach them, Sheriff Ali, to fight a modern, mechanized army.
Yes, Lieutenant. What do you think about Yambo?
I think it is far from Damascus. We'll have you in Damascus, and never fear.
Have you been in Damascus, Mr. Lawrence?
Yes, my lord.
It is beautiful, is it not?
Very. That'll do, Lawrence. Dreaming won't get you to Damascus, sir, but discipline will. Look, sir, Great Britain, it's a small country, it's much smaller than yours. Small population compared with some. It's small, but it's great. And why?
Because it has guns.
Because it has discipline.
Because it has a navy. Because of this, the English go where they please and strike where they please, and this makes them great.
Right. Mr. Lawrence, that'll do. Lieutenant Lawrence, sir, is not your military advisor.
But I would like to hear his opinion.
Damn it, Lawrence, who do you take your orders from?
From Lord Faisal, in Faisal's tent.
Old fool! Why turn from him to him, their master and man?
My lord, I think your book is right. The desert is an ocean in which no oar is dipped. And on this ocean, the Bedou go where they please and strike where they please. This is the way the Bedou has always fought. You're famed throughout the world for fighting in this way, and this is the way you should fight now. I don't know. I'm sorry, sir, but you're wrong. Fall back on Yambo, sir, and the Arab Rising becomes one poor unit in the British Army.
What is this to you?
Lawrence, do you know you're a traitor?
No, no, Colonel. He is a young man, and young men are passionate. They must say their say. But wiser people must decide. I know you are right.
Very well, sir. When shall we move? The sooner the better. You'll lose another 50 men tonight.
You tread heavily, but you speak the truth. I will give you my answer tomorrow, and now it is late. Colonel.
And so that's a good scene that I always like to refer to because and really actually the this one's worth watching too. This is right after that.
Brighton means to put my men under European officers, does he not?
In effect, my lord, yes.
And I must do it because the Turks have European guns. But I fear to do it. Upon my soul, I do. The English have a great hunger for desolate places. I fear they hunger for Arabia.
Then you must deny it to them.
You are an Englishman. Are you not loyal to England?
To England and to other things.
To England and Arabia, both? And is that possible? I think you are another of these desert-loving English. That is Stanhope, Gordon of Khartoum. No Arab loves the desert. We love water and green trees. There is nothing in the desert. No man needs nothing. Or is it that you think we are something you can play with? Because we are a little people, a silly people, greedy, barbarous, and cruel. What do you know, Lieutenant? In the Arab city of Cordoba were 2 miles of public lighting in the streets when London was a village.
Yes. You were great.
9 centuries ago.
Time to be great again, my lord.
Which is why my father made this war upon the Turks. My father, Mr. Lawrence, not the English. But my father is old. And I long for the vanished gardens of Cordoba. However, before the gardens must come the fighting. To be great again, it seems that we need the English or what no man can provide, Mr. Lawrence. We need a miracle.
And so,
my friend,
so what they're saying in that scene, let's go back to the mind map. So the guy speaking in that scene, that was T.E. Lawrence and Prince Faisal, and he says, my father is the one who started the war against the Turks. Now, this would be his father, Hussein bin Ali al-Hashimi. This is the guy who's not the real character, but all these other guys are real people. And so here's the map of what they were talking about. So they were somewhere outside of Mecca when they were meeting there and speaking. Medina was controlled by the Turks, and what Allenby was telling them to do was to fall back, and the British would reinforce them with training and small arms. And Faisal was saying they wanted to take Aqaba, which is what they end up doing under the leadership of Lawrence, and eventually Damascus is what they want. They want Damascus, and that's what the point I'm trying to convey is Damascus is a very, very highly coveted city. It always has been. It's viewed by the Arabs as an Arab city traditionally. The Turks were not Arab. They weren't even indigenous to the Middle East. They're from Central Asia, the border of Russia and Mongolia, and they moved down into the Middle East in the 12th century, 13th century, and then slowly but surely grew their empire. And at the very apex of it, around the American Revolution, it began to shrink in the 19th century and then was destroyed in World War I. So at the end of World War I, these two guys, when the British learned that Faisal's father wants to start this revolution, the Arab Revolt, which would require combining all of these different tribes who have long not gotten along and fought one another, the British saw an opportunity. They came in with a bunch of gold, and they allowed the gold to be dispersed to buy up the loyalty of these tribes, and that was necessary in order to get them on board. But the gold stopped, or the flow of gold dried up, and that's what they were talking about. There was Allenby was saying, you're going to lose another 50 men tonight, and that's because you're not providing anything of value to these guys. These guys are sitting here fighting for you; they're not getting anything out of it, so they're going to go home and take care of their own tribe. And there's a fundamental difference between the way that the Arabs view power projection, and geography, and the way that Europeans view it. Europeans value land because Europeans come from fertile places where land equals food. Land, you can grow food on farms. Land, therefore, the size of your land, the size of a tract of land you have equals the amount of men you command under your army. Doesn't work that way in the Middle East because the Middle East is mostly desert. So real estate is valued differently. Instead of land, the Arabs value, as he said, water and trees. So oases. So you'll see on this map, you'll see all these little rivers, these oases. That's where all the value is, these wells. And so you protect the wells, and when you're riding in the desert, you have to make it to the next well before your camel dies. Otherwise, you die. So owning a big, large tract of land where you can't grow food, that, it's meaningless. Defending your land, it's not about defending the land, it's about defending the water. And so when it comes time to carve up this place at the end of World War I, of course, the British stab the Arabs in the back, and the Arabs suspected that this was going to happen the whole time. But what choice did they have? And so Pico and Sykes, Sir Mark Sykes, this is the guy who actually draws up the flag of the Arab Revolt, which is this flag. He gives them the design. That flag has been used in countless flags of many, many countries all over the world, Muslim countries, but he's the one who designed it, this British officer. He's a British industrialist, really. His business partner, Francois Georges Picot, together they come up with what's called the Picot-Sykes Agreement. The Picot-Sykes Agreement was based on a map that was, let me see if I can find that map. So this is a map from 1952, but it shows, well, this is a map from, I thought I had a better map that had the whole thing. They found in 1907 that there was a huge oil belt in Iran that ran underneath the Persian Gulf. And they understood that this oil, it ran up through Iran, it went into Iraq. You can see it right here in this 2003 map. Kirkuk, anyone who served in Iraq knows Kirkuk is the major, huge oil belt right here. And so what the British wanted is they wanted to pump the oil in Iraq. They were already pumping the oil in Iran by 1914, but they wanted the oil in Iraq. They wanted the oil in the Middle East. And so this is the map that they drew up with the Picot-Sykes Agreement. And the Picot-Sykes Agreement carved up in such a way where the white lines are the national borders. They end up giving the Hashemites, who are the guys in that scene. The Hashemites try to take Syria at the end of World War I. When they find out they're getting screwed over, they launch a war. They engage in a war against the British and the French. They fight for a year. They're driven out of Damascus. And Winston Churchill goes to T.E. Lawrence and he says, "What do I do? What do I do? These guys are never going to let us develop this oil industry here." And Lawrence says, "You know what you have to do. You have to give them the kingdom you promised them. Give them their sovereignty." So the deal they strike is they end up giving the Hashemites both Iraq and Transjordan. Transjordan is the white right here, this really goofy looking piece of land. Iraq is right here. So Faisal, who was in that scene, becomes the king of Iraq. His brother becomes the king of Transjordan. And then Syria is given to the French. And even though the French weren't involved in the Middle East in the World War I, the reason they wanted to bring the French in is because the combined power of the French army and the English and the British army will keep Russia out of the Middle East. Because even though Russia was their ally in World War I, they recognized that Russia had fallen into communist hands. They didn't trust Russia to begin with. There's a long history of conflict between Britain and Russia that goes back centuries. And so to keep them out, they bring in the French and they give them Syria. And they say, all right, we're going to pump the oil in Kirkuk. We're going to run it through Transjordan to Haifa, which at the time is the British Mandate Palestine in 1919. But we're also going to run it to Tripoli and to Banias. So Tripoli, of course, is Lebanon. That's also becomes a French protectorate. And Banias is in Syria. And so they basically are telling the French, you need to protect the pipelines. We're going to pump the oil. You're going to protect the pipelines. And that's how they cultivate the oil industry. And so the idea that we went into Iraq in 2001 for the oil is ludicrous. It wasn't for the oil. It was for other reasons, but we already controlled the oil at that point. Now, the oil may have fallen into other people's hands, but the oil industry for the most part was already deeply cultivated, a century old at that point, almost. There were other pipelines they were trying to build that's related to what we're going to talk about tonight. And so that kind of lays the framework for where we're going to go. And going back to Syria. All right, so we have Assad. So Assad is, let me make sure I'm sharing the right screen. Yep, sure I am. All right, so Assad is born September 11th, 1965 in Damascus. He's the second son of Hafiz al-Assad, who was the president of Syria from 1971 until 2000. So Hafez al-Assad comes into power in 1971 through a military coup. He's part of the Ba'ath Party. That's how we pronounce it, but it's spelled B-A''ATH. And the Ba'ath Party is kind of like a socialist secular party that comes into power in the late 1950s in both Iraq and Syria. And interestingly enough, before we get to Hafez, I will show you this. Here we go. So here are all the attempts of the pan-Arab movement. The pan-Arab movement would be like the Arab nationalist movement, which is what the guys in that scene I just showed you wanted. They wanted their sovereignty. They wanted control of their country. And so here are all of the different pan-Arab movements in the latter 20th century. You have, this map is a little confusing because it's kind of like trying to show you all these different pan-Arab movements over, 2 or 3 decades. This one's a little cleaner. You have the Arab Federation. And so in 1958, I told you before that 2 Hashemite brothers, Faisal is given Iraq, his brother is given Jordan. Their grandsons are in power in 1958. In Iraq, it's a relatively young guy. In Jordan, it would be the current king of Jordan, Abdullah. It would be his grandfather was in power at that point. This is 1958. And his grandfather is visiting his great uncle, I guess it would be, in Iraq. They come up with a plan to merge the 2 kingdoms into one kingdom. Although they both are going to maintain their autonomy effectively. It's going to basically be more of like a really, really strong alliance. Abdullah's grandfather leaves Baghdad, and as soon as he leaves, this violent uprising occurs, and his great uncle this would be Faisal's grandson, is grabbed. His cousin, who's the prime minister, is grabbed. Their heads are chopped off, their hands chopped off, feet are chopped off, their bodies are put on display naked. All the women and children of the family are rounded up, brought into the courtyard in the palace, and they're all executed. They're all shot in the head. And that's the end of the Hashemite dynasty in Iraq. That's the end of Faisal's effectively the end of Faisal's family. His nephews survive in Jordan, and that's who's now in power. But of course, the CIA, in all likelihood, MI6 are behind all of this. At the same time, the same year, we have, and so that was called the Arab Federation. And that was basically what they were trying to counter this thing called the United Arab Republic, which 2 weeks before that, this is early February 1958, Egypt and Syria had come to an agreement to merge into a single country under Nasser. And so this actually was unlike the Arab Federation. Nasser asked for the Syrian government and the Syrian military to become completely subordinate to Egypt, which at the time, Egypt was a far more powerful country. So it made sense that if there's going to be a hierarchy, it's going to be Egypt over Syria. And so all of the power, all the political power and military power goes to Egypt. There are 4 men who are appointed to a committee, a military committee, to represent the Ba'ath Party, that represent Syria, because this is right after the Ba'ath Party comes into power. One of these guys is Hafez, Assad's father. And this lasts from 1958 to 1961 for 3 years. And then Hafez and the others launch a military coup. They realize they've lost all their power. They've given all their power to Nasser. They've given all their power to Egypt. And so they launch a military coup. They take back control of Syria. And another guy, not Hafez, not Assad's father, but another guy is made leader of Syria. And then here are a few other just unification efforts. You have this one in 1964 between Egypt, Iraq, and North Yemen. You have the Federation of Arab Republics that lasted from 1970 to 1977. This is Libya, Egypt, Syria, and Sudan. This is Gaddafi's the one who put this one together. You have the Arab Islamic Republic. This is another Gaddafi orchestrated thing in 1974. Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya. You have the Syrian-Iraqi Union in 1978 between Syria and Iraq. And this is between Hafez Assad and the Iraqi president al-Bakir. Al-Bakir is then replaced by through a coup, and Saddam Hussein comes into power after that. And I mean, the rest is kind of history from there. Point is that there have been a lot of efforts to try to unite the Arabs under like a nationalist movement, and they've all had different flavors to them, different political hierarchies, but all of them have been thwarted one way or another. Didn't work out. Some of them was internal struggles. Some of it was external influence. A lot of it was ended in violence. But anyway, so Assad, let's talk about him. So Assad comes into Assad is born in 1965. He's raised in Damascus. He attends an Arab French school in Al-Hurriya in Damascus. He studies medicine at the University of Damascus, specializing in ophthalmology. Sorry, I can't say that word, but he's an eye doctor. So then in the 1990s, early 1990s, he moves to the Western Eye Hospital in London to study surgery and to become a surgeon. That's his life path. The name Assad, by the way, the word Assad in Arabic means lion. So that's where the Lion of Damascus comes from. That's where their name comes from. So his older brother, Basil, was the one who was groomed to take over from Hafez, his father. But in 1994, his brother dies in a car crash. And so then the father tells Bashar, you need to come home. At that point, he would be 28 years old, a 28-year-old surgeon studying in London to become an eye surgeon. So he returns home. He's enrolled in the military academy in Homs. He's promoted quickly. He's appointed to oversee these anti-corruption campaigns and kind of like gain political exposure, gain, so he can become familiar with the public. These anti-corruption campaigns are designed to target. They aren't really going after. I mean, maybe they're going after some corruption, but it's really more about consolidating power in the eyes of his father. These are like the old guard Ba'athist leaders, old political rivals from his father, who his father's worried that once he abdicates or dies, these guys are going to step in and challenge Bashar. So he says, we're going to go after them first. There was a power struggle between him and this guy named Salah Jadid. So the guys who supported Jadid were targeted. Hafez's brother, this would be Bashar's uncle in the 1980s, tried to lead a coup against Hafez that failed. So there were people who supported the coup who were never arrested because they were powerful. All of them were targeted in this like anti-corruption purge. Yeah, and so there's a number of these individuals who were targeted during this purge, and Assad and Bashar is put in charge of it. So the Arab Socialist Party in the 1950s is actually what merged with the Ba'ath Party in 1952. That's what creates the party that Assad is part of. But even though they call themselves the Arab Socialist Party, they're still very much afraid of communism. Nasser in Egypt is very deeply aligned with the Soviet Union, and so they consider Nasser to be a communist. He was branded a communist by the Western media. Some of that was deserved. Some of it was probably a little overstated. But it's just important to understand that there's a very complex history of socialism in the Middle East. and these groups that pop up. Israel, by the way, entirely founded by socialists. Their entire political spectrum is socialist. I've talked about that before. So this anti-corruption purge that happens in the 1990s, run by Bashar, culminates with his father dying in the year 2000. I think the age at the time was 45 to be president. So they convene like an emergency constitutional convention. They amend the constitution to lower it to 34 because that's how old Bashar was. He wins in like a one candidate, there's like a referendum where he's the only person who runs. He gets like 97% of the votes. And then there's this thing called the Damascus Spring, where a bunch of intellectuals and academics, a lot of them probably tied to Western organizations, sign letters publicly demanding change to the society in Syria. And this is where it gets a little complicated because, like Bashar comes in, he has ideas for things. He's like, all right, if I'm going to be in charge, I have specific ideas of how I want to run things. And we're going to get to those in a minute. But he's being handed a very, very broken, fractured society. There's so many different ethnicities in Syria. It's probably one of the most ethnically diverse places in the Middle East. Very, very, very religiously diverse. And his father and all these military leaders have kind of set up this really kind of broken, corrupt society where all of the military leaders are on the take. They're all siphoning money out of the government. They're all very, very wealthy. They're locking up political dissidents. And it's difficult for Assad to come in there and just overnight change the whole thing. Although he tries to make changes progressively, focusing on the economy, focusing on prosperity. And that's why I wanted to start with that thread from General Flynn to kind of convey that by 2010, the year before the Syrian civil war breaks out in the Arab Spring, Syria was considered kind of a prospering society, certainly in comparison to other places in the Middle East at the time. So 9/11 happens, 2001. We invade Iraq. The big Iraq war happens in 2003. And there's this Arab Union, like the thing that I just kind of ran through from 1950 to 1970s, is proposed again. The Arab Union of 2004. Let's flip over to that real quick. And so this is a proposition by Gaddafi. And so it says here that, Egyptian President Gamal Nasser made several unsuccessful attempts to unite Egypt with other Arab countries, including Iraq and North Yemen, and briefly succeeded in forming the United Arab Republic with Syria in 1958, which dissolved in 1971. Actually, I think it was 1961. But similar attempts were made by other Arab leaders. So let's see. Yes, here it is. In the 2004 Arab League Summit in Cairo, Yemeni President Ali Abdullah Saleh proposed the creation of an Arab Union, replacing the Arab League for a stronger political and geographical body capable of dealing with the world issues. However, the proposal failed to reach the League's agenda. During the Arab Spring in 2011, Saudi Arabia raised a proposal to transform the Gulf Cooperation Council into a Gulf Union. So that's something that we'll talk about during the Arab Spring episode. But I wanted to get in the... So in 2004, they talk about forming this Arab Union, and basically Gaddafi is on board with it. Assad expresses support for it, but he never actually does anything political to back it, and it doesn't really end up going anywhere. But at that same Arab League in 2004, it's worth noting that that's also where the Saudis come back and reintroduced the 1981 two-state solution. 1981 was the first Arab League summit where the Saudis brought up the two-state solution, where Palestine would recognize Israel, Israel would recognize Palestine, and there'd be peace. and that got tabled because of all these wars that broke out in the 1980s and all these terrorist groups that formed. But in 2004, they reintroduced it and they said, hey, 23 years ago, we brought up this idea of a two-state solution. We should revisit that and make it happen. That's also the year that Yasser Arafat was killed. So a lot of things happening in 2004 that kind of changed the landscape in the Middle East. One of the things that comes to light is because remember that CNN clip we watched earlier, where that woman is warning Assad that there are people who want to overthrow him in the West, in DC. And here's the reason they wanted to overthrow him. Assad's 5 C's vision. And so this goes back, remember, because he's not a military, he doesn't have a military background. Like, he was plugged into the military as kind of like a PR campaign, and then put in charge of these purges, these like anti-corruption purges, which were really just like persecuting political rivals to make sure that when the father dies, they don't all rise up and try to take out Assad. But I'll read the abstract from this. This is 2004. This is right after the Iraq War, remember. Based on its cultural heritage and future visions, Syria launched the 5 C's initiative in 2004 with the intention of improving regional cooperation. This initiative triggered a plethora of new paradigms and terminologies that address several developments expected to influence both the Middle Eastern conflict theater and the international landscape, particularly in the period 2010-2011, after 9 years of war that served to undermine this abstract, I think, was written in 2019 or 2020. It says, after 9 years of war that served to undermine the 5 C's initiative, and upon the failure of the hegemony of global capitalism in its crude forms, it is now time to put forward a real alternative based on common interests between regional and international actors, which would respect regional diversity away from extremism. And so it says both China and Saudi Arabia have approached Assad during the Biden administration to revive this proposal as part of the Belt and Road Initiative and Saudi Vision 2030. So here is the map. This is what Assad proposed doing as an alternative to war, because he said, look, Iraq has just been overthrown. Before this whole region falls into war and we all just start killing each other, why don't we look into ways where we can mutually benefit from trade? And so he proposed building this massive infrastructure project, this rail project. So all these red lines represent the 5 C strategy, refers to the 5 C's you see on the screen here. The Black Sea, which is, remember, Ukraine and Turkey. The Caspian Sea, which is Russia and Iran. The Persian Gulf, which is Iran and Saudi Arabia. The Red Sea, which is Saudi Arabia and Egypt primarily, and Sudan. And then the Mediterranean Sea, of course. And so the 5 C's project would be to connect these 5 bodies of water with rail lines, pipelines, the ports that are in all these places, wherever that's practical. The red lines on the screen represent rail lines. You can see Aleppo is kind of positioned naturally to be the main hub of all of these different railways. So Assad is basically positioning Syria to be this major hub for trade between Africa, Asia, and Europe. And that's what these rail lines would represent. And so he wanted to focus on prosperity. He wanted to focus on building trade routes and trade networks. And he understood, as an educated, highly educated, very smart individual, being a surgeon, that if he focused on offering the carrot, you wouldn't have to go with the stick. And it's a strategy, by the way, that Donald Trump has utilized as president, both in his first term and his second term. Go to the economy first, fix the economy, give people a reason to want to not want to go to war, and that can really subvert a lot of that violence. Here are the gas lines that he was talking about building. So the solid red lines are ones that already existed. The dash lines were proposed, newly proposed gas lines. So from Basra to Baghdad, from Tehran to Baghdad, that would be a really big deal. Tehran to Baghdad, because Iran and Iraq have historically been enemies. They fought a major war in the late 1980s that kind of weakened Iraq a lot and made Iraq pretty ripe for Desert Storm in 1991. We go in Desert Storm, we bomb the shit out of them and really weaken them. And then, of course, when we go back 10 years later, makes it a lot easier to take them out. But this would connect Basra, which is Iraq, Tehran, which is Iran, Seyhan, which is Turkey, Kirkuk, which is Iraq, Tartus, which is Syria, and Tripoli, which is Lebanon. And so you can see how these pipelines would connect, again, Europe with Asia, Iran being Asia, with the Middle East, Lebanon and Syria, and then, of course, the Persian Gulf, Basra. It would, it does leave out Qatar. And when you think about this other pipeline that we were talking about, these are the pipelines that they were looking at in 2010, 5 or 6 years later. And this was with Russia's backing. Russia was saying, all right, well, why don't we run the pipeline from the coast in Iran straight across Iraq into Tartus. And of course, that's not what the Western powers wanted. They wanted it to come from Qatar, across Saudi Arabia, across Jordan, across Syria, through Turkey and into Europe. And that would compete directly with the pipelines that we're hearing so much about now that run through Ukraine. So that was the reason they wanted them, is so then they could subvert Putin, subvert Russia. And Assad said no. Assad said, no, we're not doing that. We're not, like, you can't run this red pipeline right here. Like, you do not have permission, actually, Qatar, to run this pipeline up there. And the story goes that these Qatari oligarchs went to Hillary Clinton and gave her $25 million, and she was Secretary of State at the time. Donations were made to the Clinton Foundation, and the rest is history. But I doubt she really needed that much convincing. I don't think she's a very big fan of Russia or Assad, and that's pretty firmly on record. This is also worth noting here. This is HR, which stands for House of Representatives 4655, the 105th Congress, which is the 1998 Congress. This was a passed House amendment on October 5th, 1998. It's called the Iraq Liberation Act of 1998. Declares that it should be the policy of the United States to seek to remove the Saddam Hussein regime from power in Iraq and replace it with a democratic government. That of course became the mission after 9/11. Nobody really bothered to explain how Saddam Hussein was connected to 9/11, and the answer is he wasn't at all. But and here's proof that 3 years before 9/11, they were already passing legislation in Congress that said we're going to go out and kill Saddam and overthrow his government. So there you go. There's the proof. And so here's Lindsey Graham, of course, when Assad was overthrown, celebrating that ISIS has overthrown Assad. He is backing Turkey here. I think it's really important that he is backing Turkey. Here's Trump backing Turkey and saying, stay out of it. We don't want to be involved. We don't want to be involved. Stay out of it. So I think those are some pretty important signals. We're not going to get into that any deeper tonight. Well, here, before we continue, because we're going to do a little bit more before we get out of here, let's do another ad. Let's see. So let's stop sharing. Do share screen. All right. Experience the miracle of a God-given first responder for your health, and an ally in your body that fights everything from minor ailments to major health threats. That ally is your immune system. At Pet Club 24/7, we harness the ancient wisdom of nature with our exclusive potent strain of medicinal mushrooms revered for thousands of years for their immune supporting properties that are extremely safe, with no additions or overdoses, no side effects, and no interactions with medications. Transform how you manage health with our all natural products and help Pet Club change the world, one pet and one person at a time. Visit badlandsmedia.tv/pet club to learn now to explore how we're redefining wellness for both pets and people. That's badlandsmedia.tv/pet club, treating pets and their parents better. All right. And thank you to Pet Club. I don't know if that actually played, so. Okay, so let's see. How's the chat doing? I don't have multiple screens tonight, so looks like we've got a few rants. Let's hit some rants right now. Greetings all. Great reward to asking and looking is finding such a thing as this program offers. That's from Yin to Wander, $1. Thank you, GPH. Thank you, Yin to Wander. Appreciate your support. Texas Tanya, $5. I truly appreciate your research and knowledge, Gordon. Well, Tanya, I truly appreciate your support. Thanks for being here. Unathiok, $5. Good. God bless you, brother. I wish you were on every day. Yeah, well, thank you. We will, maybe one day we will get to that point. That would be great. Says, Unathiok, sorry. Okay. It says, sorry, it's pronounced Unati. Unati. Okay. So Unati. Gotcha. All right. I don't know if you're referring to your name or if you're referring to something that I mispronounced, but if I mispronounce something, that's just how I talk. Let's see. All right. So now we can go back to this. And this is the one. Okay. So let's see. So where was I? Okay, so let's talk about Putin for a minute, because I think Putin obviously is going to tie into this a lot, and he's going to become a much bigger player. The second, like the follow-up episode to this, which we're not going to do next week, but we'll do in the near future, which will be the Arab Spring and the Syrian Civil War. But I think it's worth discussing how him and Assad get along at the very beginning of their relationship. Because remember, Assad comes into power in June of 2000. Putin comes into power in 1999, as we discussed last week. But he's prime minister, and then Yeltsin, the Russian president, resigns in 2000. So then Putin becomes the guy. And so they have kind of they have a pragmatic relationship. There's kind of like this re-engagement effort that happens between Putin and Assad. At the time, Syria owed a debt to Russia, to the Soviet Union, from the Soviet era. It was $13 billion. And Assad basically is asking Putin to relieve that debt. And I actually have an article. Let me pull up the article. And so Assad is asking Putin to relieve the debt. Putin ends up traveling to Syria. He's like the first Russian president to visit in decades, to visit Syria in 2005. And this is one of the things that Putin does that really, I think, pisses off a lot of people in DC. But at that point, as Putin had explained to Oliver Stone in his 2015 interview, he had already tried to make peace with George Bush. He'd already gone to George Bush with hat in hand and been like, hey, man, let's bury the hatchet. Let's work together collaborate on a missile defense array system. And we can kind of put all this Cold War stuff behind us. And George Bush Sr. tells him to pound sand and says, nope, we have no interest in being friends with you. Get out of here. So then Putin says, all right, well, I guess I'm going to have to find friends elsewhere, and begins to engage with, with people who aren't as beloved, I guess you say, in DC. Because at this time, remember, this is when that woman from CNN, 2005, had explained to Assad on camera that they were trying to DC was interested in never throwing him. So Putin visits him. Assad asks him to relieve the debt. He ends up relieving 73%, according to this article, which I'm waiting for our archive to pull up. Here it is. Sometimes it takes archive a minute to think. So this is from Haaretz, the Israeli-based magazine, January 24, 2005. Putin vows no missile deal with Syria during Assad visit because Assad wanted some weapons. Russian President Vladimir Putin promised Prime Minister Ariel Sharon in a phone conversation Thursday that he would not close the deal to sell shoulder-launched missiles to Syrian President Bashar Assad during the latter's visit to Moscow, which begins today. But Russian President Vladimir Putin promised Prime Minister Sharon in the phone conversation Thursday he would not close the deal to sell shoulder-mounted launched missiles to Syrian President Bashar al-Assad in the visit to Moscow. Here it is. In separate statements published by the two countries, it was said that in spite of military cooperation between them, the supply of the Russian-made weaponry to Syria is not on the agenda. Quote, our cooperation with Syria is multifaceted, including military cooperation, but it never went beyond international agreements. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said last week the president's visit to Moscow will certainly not focus on the question of weapons, the Syrian Ba'ath Party spokesman said. Syria said it expects the visit to bring about closer commercial ties with Russia. It's funny that 20 years ago, you still had Putin and Sergei Lavrov giving quotes in the media. So it says this, Nathan Gutman adds that Syria is interested in renewing talks with Israel and expects a positive reaction from Israel. Syrian Foreign Minister Farouk Sharah said during an interview with CNN, Sharah said the formula for a peace agreement with Israel is total peace in exchange for total withdrawal, talking about the Golan Heights, and added that a narrow window for peace had opened and he hoped it would open further. He welcomed talks between Israel and the Palestinians and said Palestinian Authority Chairman Mahmoud Abbas was doing great work. He noted that the Syrian military presence in Lebanon had decreased over the years and that in many cases, Syria did not intend to leave its soldiers in Lebanon forever. Sharah rejected American allegations that Syria allowed Iraqi insurgents a free hand to operate from within its territory and that it permitted the insurgents to cross over the border from Iraq to harm American soldiers. He said that the reports of the insurgents were greatly exaggerated, noting that among 25 million Iraqis, they numbered only a few hundred. If they are crossing the border of any country, he told the interviewer, it was against the will of the government of Syria. Yeah, so that's interesting that article is from 20 years ago because it feels like you probably could publish that article today and it would have a lot of relevancy. Let's see. As a result of that meeting, though, you have the debt 73%, $10 billion of the $13 billion is written off by Putin. Ultimately, Syria does end up buying Russian weapons and deepening economic ties. That eventually does come. Putin sees this as an opportunity to counteract NATO and U.S. encroachment by going into the Middle East because the U.S. obviously was in the Middle East at the time, and Russia already had a historic relationship with Syria. So it made sense that he would re-engage with this young leader. At the time, in 2004, Bashar would have been 38. Putin would have been 51, I think. So that makes sense. It makes sense that they both, relatively young leaders in the world. But it wasn't a top priority for Putin. Syria was pretty far down on the list and all the other fires that he was dealing with in Eastern Europe. The events that led up to the Ukraine situation. So Assad is trying to make this 5C strategy plan work. He's getting the cold trust. He's getting talked down to by Europe and by America. And basically that kind of drives him into the arms of Iran, because Iran is all about it. Iran is gung-ho for a military for an economic cooperation with Syria. They want access to the Mediterranean Sea. They see the benefit in having an alliance with Syria, given the historic conflict between Syria and Israel. And of course, Russia being right there, having conversations with both countries, Syria and Iran getting along made a lot of sense in the eyes of both sides. I think ultimately Iran saw Syria as a land bridge. If we go to the map, you can see how, even though they're not directly connected, if Iran can establish a relationship with the Kurds, and which it can't, because the Kurds and the Iranian government don't get along. But if it can establish a network into Syria, it can have a land bridge to Hezbollah, which is in Lebanon. And Iran and Hezbollah are obviously working together. So Assad's trying to make friends with Hezbollah, trying to make friends with Iran. The West is not happy about that. But frankly, we did it to ourselves, because we kind of told Assad to pound sand when he wanted to do these economic development plans, because apparently the third world countries and second world countries are not allowed to have prosperity. They're not allowed to have economies. They're not allowed to have nuclear power plants. They're not allowed to have high-speed railroad or any of the advancements that a prospering civilization would aspire for. So we do this stuff to ourselves, and then we wonder why none of these countries like us. It's pretty despicable. So yeah, I think we'll probably about cap it there, because everything else I have on Assad kind of starts to get us into the Arab Spring and Saudi Arabia and everything that's happening there. But I will say this: I will kind of, to bring it full circle, to bring everything that I showed earlier with the Lawrence of Arabia stuff full circle. So when the Arab Spring happens in 2011, the Syrian civil war starts against the will of Assad. Hillary Clinton, Secretary of State, uses her clout to have Syria kicked out of the Arab League in 2011. And this is May 19th, 2023. Assad gets warm reception as Syria welcomed back into the Arab League. So MBS hosts the Arab League in Riyadh. There's like this big moment where you can see it in the opening of this show. If you go back and watch it, there's a moment where like they hug each other, and then like MBS gestures at the camera, very similar to the moment when Trump and Kim Jong-un embraced one another with a handshake, and then Trump gestures at the camera. And that was a big moment, because MBS makes a speech where he says, echoing what Faisal told Lawrence 100 years before, where he says, Damascus is part of Arabia. Syria is part of Arabia. We don't want it to be in the axis of influence of Iran or Turkey. We want Syria to be part of Arabia. I think that's really, really important. I think that's an interesting idea. Historically, it makes a lot of sense. Where we stand right now with where Syria is it's in the orbit of influence, the sphere of influence of Turkey. And President Trump has said that. Lindsey Graham has said that. Netanyahu would certainly refute that. He wants it to be in the influence of Tel Aviv, but it is basically being fought over by Israel and Turkey, and ultimately belongs to Arabia, which is why I think we will see Assad return to power in Damascus. So with that said, we are past our time limit. It's 9:15, 9:17. So we are going to go ahead and check out the boosts. I'll make sure there aren't any more rants. Let's check the rants first. All right, Ziva 95, $10. Thank you. Thank you, Ziva. Appreciate your support. And Kelhis, I hope I'm saying that right. It might be Kelly's. $50. Wow. Thank you for your great history lessons, Ghost. Thank you, Kelly. Appreciate y'all's support. Please hit the thumbs up. It looks like I think we do have a few rants or boosts, rather. Let's see. Book of Trump. All right, so we have MFAGA. I don't know if that's MFAGA or if I'm saying that right, but MFAGA, $50. Great lessons about Russia. Thanks for helping me to fill in the blanks in my own research. I was always distrustful of the info I got about Russia, mainly about Putin, and for giving us a taste of true history. Keep up with your good job. Well, thank you for your support. I really appreciate it. That last week was great with Burning Bright, and I know that I was hoping to get Matt on tonight, but couldn't make that happen. But I wanted to go ahead with the episode. But I know Matt Arrett has a lot of really, really good information on the Assad. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring him on for kind of the part 2 of this episode, which will be the Arab Spring Syrian Civil War episode. And I'll start that episode by giving Matt the floor and letting him kind of lay out his understanding of Assad and his perspective of him. And then we'll pick it up from there. But yeah, I think this is a really interesting subject. I do think it's very relevant, especially when you consider the lies that our government's told us, our media has told us, and the misrepresentations that are out there. And I applaud General Flynn for posting that thread and bringing attention to it and encouraging people to read it, because I think we should be challenging the narratives that we've been told by our government. So with that said, I'm going to end it here, guys. Thank you for watching. If you would, please hit the thumbs up and share this with your friends. I will go track down that episode I did with John, and I'll drop it in the comments for anyone who wants to see the deeper dive on that earlier post-World War I history of the Middle East. And thank you all. Oh, wait, we got another rant that just came in. MT Flat, $20. Thanks for digging into history. It adds context where needed. Well, thank you. Appreciate it. And I see people talking about Deadwood. Clarkston B, thanks, Ghost. Can't wait to visit you in Deadwood in August. Yeah, look forward to August, man. Looking forward to Deadwood. Deadwood was awesome. So thank you all again for watching. Actually, Culture of Change, I think, is on right now. So go watch Culture of Change. I'm not going to do a raid because A, I don't know how to do them, and B, people always complain because people will join the show late and they'll be in the middle of watching the show, and apparently the raid drags everyone into the next show. So we're not going to do a raid. We're just going to do the hard out. So let's see if we can set the outro video. Well, the outro, I don't have the outro video, so we're just going to do a hard out here. Everyone have a good night, and we will see you next week. Thanks again.